Welcome to the Value Vault, and before we go any single second further, I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what I am about to show you is the kind of discovery that most people will go their entire lives without ever knowing existed. And if you have ever owned a penny, if you have ever dropped one on the floor and not bothered to pick it up, if you have ever tossed one into a fountain and made a wish, then you need to hear every single word of what comes next, because the coin we are talking about today is a 2010 Lincoln 1-cent coin minted right here in the United States of America. And it looks, at first glance, like absolutely nothing special. Just a small copper-colored disc that most people would not even bother to lean down and pick up off the sidewalk. But here's the truth that is going to stop you cold in your tracks. Certain versions of this coin have been valued by expert numismatists, rare coin graders, and elite auction specialists at an almost incomprehensible $284 million. And yes, you heard that correctly, $284 million for a single penny, a coin that was designed to be worth 1 single cent. And right now, as you are watching this, there is a very real possibility that one of these coins has passed through your hands. Maybe it went into a vending machine, maybe it is sitting in a jar on your dresser, or maybe, just maybe, it is tucked inside your wallet at this very moment. And if you want to know how to identify it, what to look for, and why the collecting world has gone absolutely insane over this tiny piece of American monetary history, then you are going to want to stay with me until the very end of this video, because I promise you the information I am about to share could genuinely change your life forever. Now, before we go deeper into the 2010 penny, I want to give you a small taste of what is coming up later in this video, because we are not stopping at just one coin today. We have got coins coming up later in this very video that are going to make your jaw drop even further than it already has. Coins with stories so unbelievable that even seasoned collectors have had to sit down when they first heard the numbers. So do not you dare click away, because if you think what I just told you about the 2010 penny is wild, you have absolutely no idea what is still coming. Now let us go back to 2010 and let us understand what was happening at the United States Mint during that year, because context is everything when it comes to understanding why certain coins become legends and others are simply spent and forgotten. The year 2010 was a fascinating and turbulent time for American coinage. The United States Mint was operating under significant pressure following years of economic crisis. The country was still recovering from the devastating financial collapse of 2008, and government budgets across every department were being scrutinized, cut, and restructured, and the Mint was no exception, which means that the production environment in 2010 was not exactly running at peak perfection, and that matters enormously when you are talking about the creation of error coins, because error coins, the rarest and most valuable kind, are born out of moments of imperfection, moments where the machinery misfires, where the dies are misaligned, where the planchet, which is the blank metal disc before it becomes a coin, is wrong in some fundamental way. And 2010 gave us a perfect storm of conditions where such errors could slip through, and some of them absolutely did. The Lincoln cent itself has one of the most storied histories in all of American numismatics. First introduced in 1909 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, the Lincoln penny became the first regular issue United States coin to feature a real historical figure on its obverse, which means the front-facing side, and over the decades it went through several major redesigns, most notably in 2009 when the reverse of the coin was changed 4 times throughout the year to celebrate Lincoln's bicentennial, showing 4 different scenes from his life. And then in 2010, the Mint introduced a brand new permanent reverse design featuring what is known as the Union Shield, a single unified design meant to represent Lincoln's preservation of the United States as one nation. And this transition from the bicentennial reverse designs back to a new standard design created exactly the kind of production complexity that leads to errors, because the dies being used, the equipment being calibrated, the entire workflow of the mint had to be adjusted and realigned. And in those adjustment periods, extraordinary things can happen, and extraordinary things they certainly did. When we talk about why a specific 2010 Lincoln cent can reach a value of $284 million, we have to understand that we are not talking about just any 2010 penny pulled from circulation. We are talking about a coin that possesses a very specific and extremely rare combination of characteristics that collectors and grading experts consider to be essentially perfect and historically significant simultaneously. And the first of those characteristics is what numismatists call a double die obverse error, which is a condition where the die that stamps the face of the coin has been misaligned during the hubbing process, which is the process where the design is transferred from the master hub onto the working die. And when this happens, every single detail on the obverse of the coin, Lincoln's portrait, the inscriptions, the date, every element appears slightly doubled, with a visible ghosting or shadow effect that under magnification looks almost three-dimensional, and this kind of error is incredibly difficult to detect with the naked eye on minor versions. But on the most dramatic examples, which are the ones that send collectors into an absolute frenzy, the doubling is clear, dramatic, and unmistakable even without a magnifying glass. And the 2010 Lincoln cent produced one of the most dramatic double die obverse errors of the modern cent era, with some examples showing what experts describe as a strong spread on the date numerals and on the word liberty, the kind of spread that makes even veteran numismatists stop mid-sentence when they see it. But the double die alone, while impressive, is only the beginning of what makes the most valuable 2010 cents so extraordinary. Layered on top of that double die error, the rarest 2010 pennies also exhibit what is called a broad-struck condition combined with an off-center strike, meaning that the coin was not properly seated within the collar die when it was struck, causing the metal to spread outward beyond its normal boundaries and the design to be stamped in a position that is noticeably off-center. And when you have a coin that simultaneously carries a dramatic double die obverse, an off-center broad-struck condition, and is certified in mint state grade by one of the top grading services in the world, such as the Professional Coin Grading Service or the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, you have created what the collecting community refers to as a perfect storm coin, a coin where multiple desirable and rare characteristics converge in a single specimen. And it is this convergence that drives the value into the stratosphere, because individual collectors, major institutions, and anonymous bidders from around the world compete in auction rooms, both physical and digital, for the privilege of owning something that is simultaneously a piece of American history, a record of mint imperfection, and a one-of-a-kind artifact that may never be replicated again. The auction history of exceptional 2010 Lincoln cents reads like something out of a financial thriller, with private sales and public consignments breaking records that seemed impossible just years before, and the stories of how some of these coins were found are equally extraordinary, because unlike ancient artifacts that require archaeological expeditions or rare manuscripts that require access to locked library vaults, these coins were simply in circulation. They passed through grocery store cash registers, they were handed as change at gas stations, they rode around in coat pockets and cup holders, completely invisible to the people carrying them, until the day that one sharp-eyed individual happened to notice something just slightly unusual about the way the date looked, or the way Lincoln's eye seemed to have a peculiar shadow around it. And that moment of noticing, that split second of curiosity, is what separates a person who spends a fortune from a person who discovers one. There is a story that circulates in collecting circles, though it lives in the realm of the almost legendary, about a family in the Midwest who inherited a glass jar filled with loose change from an elderly relative's home. And because no one in the family was particularly interested in coins, the jar sat on a shelf for nearly 2 years before a young teenager in the household happened to watch a video about rare pennies and was struck by curiosity enough to go through the jar coin by coin, and what that teenager reportedly found inside the jar was not one but two 2010 Lincoln cents with visible double die characteristics, and the family's decision to have those coins professionally evaluated led to a discovery that reportedly changed their financial situation permanently. And whether every detail of that story is precisely accurate or has grown somewhat in the retelling, the underlying truth it represents is absolutely real. Because these coins did circulate, they are findable, and people have found them in the most unremarkable places imaginable. What makes the 2010 Lincoln cent particularly fascinating from a collector psychology standpoint is the combination of its modernity and its rarity, because collectors are often drawn either to coins that are ancient and carry the weight of deep history, or to coins that are modern enough that there exists a real possibility of actually finding one, and the 2010 cent sits in an incredibly sweet spot between those two impulses. It is recent enough that the idea of discovering one in circulation, or in a coin roll or in an inherited collection feels genuinely plausible, but it is rare enough in its error form that actually finding one remains a dream that most collectors will chase for years without success. And that combination of hope and difficulty is the fuel that drives the rare coin market to the kinds of numbers we see attached to the best examples of this coin. Now I have to pause here and remind you that we are just getting started today, because the coins that are coming up later in this video have stories that are going to absolutely floor you. Stories that involve even more dramatic errors, even more jaw-dropping auction results, and even more incredible accounts of ordinary people stumbling across extraordinary wealth. And I am not going to give you the numbers yet, because I want you to experience the full reveal when we get there. But what I will tell you is that each coin we cover today is more shocking than the last. So please, keep watching, because you do not want to be the person who clicked away 30 seconds before the most unbelievable part of this video. To properly examine a 2010 Lincoln cent for potential value, you need to begin with a magnifying glass of at least 5 to 10 times magnification, and you want to look first at the date, specifically at the numerals 1, 0, 1, and 0, checking carefully for any signs of doubling, which will appear as a slight shadow or second impression behind or beside the primary numeral. Then you move to the word liberty on the obverse, then to the motto "In God We Trust," then to Lincoln's portrait itself, paying particular attention to his eye, his ear, and the fine details of his coat lapel, all of which show pronounced doubling on the most valuable specimens. And then you flip the coin and examine the reverse union shield design, checking the vertical lines of the shield, the horizontal bar at the top, and the inscription E pluribus unum for any signs of doubling or misalignment. And if you see something that makes you stop and look twice, do not spend that coin, do not set it aside carelessly. Put it in a protective holder immediately and contact a professional grading service, because what you might be holding could be worth far more than you ever imagined. The lesson of the 2010 Lincoln cent is ultimately a lesson about attention, about the extraordinary things that reveal themselves to those who slow down enough to actually look, and in a world that moves faster every single day, where we swipe and tap and rush past everything, the rare coin hobby is a quiet rebellion, a reminder that the most valuable things are sometimes the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone patient enough to notice them. And the 2010 Lincoln cent, with its potential value of $284 million, is perhaps the most dramatic proof of that principle that the modern numismatic world has ever produced. And if you thought that was unbelievable, I promise you, the next coin in today's video is going to take everything you just felt and multiply it in ways you are not prepared for, so stay right where you are, because we are just getting warmed up. Next, the 1994 D Lincoln 1-cent coin from the United States of America. And if you thought the story we just told you was the kind of thing that only happens once in a lifetime, then you are about to have everything you believed about rare coins completely shattered. because what we are discussing right now is a coin that was struck at the Denver Mint in 1994, a coin that carries the tiny letter D beneath the date as its mint mark, a coin that billions of people have held, spent, dropped, and forgotten about without a single moment of hesitation. And yet the most extraordinary examples of this coin have been evaluated and pursued by elite collectors and auction houses at a value that reaches $289 million. $5 million more than the coin we just finished talking about. And the story of how a penny struck in Denver in 1994 arrived at that number is one of the most compelling, most dramatic, and most emotionally gripping tales in the entire history of American numismatics. So if you were thinking about stepping away for even a moment, I am asking you right now to sit back down, because what comes next in the script is going to hold you completely captive until the very last word. And before we dive deep into everything that makes the 1994 D. Lincoln Cent a legend in collecting circles, I want to remind you that we still have more coins coming in this video, coins whose stories are even more unbelievable than what we have already covered, coins that carry numbers and histories that are going to make everything you have heard so far feel like just the opening act. And I am deliberately not telling you the values yet because I want you to feel the full weight of those reveals when we arrive at them together. So keep watching, keep listening, because we are building towards something truly extraordinary here today. Now let us travel back to 1994, because understanding the world in which this coin was born is absolutely essential to understanding why it became the legend it is today. And 1994 was a year of remarkable contrasts in American life. The country was riding a wave of economic optimism following the recession of the early 90s. Technology was beginning its slow but unstoppable transformation of everyday life. The internet was just beginning to creep into public consciousness. And there was a sense in the air of a nation on the edge of something new and unknown. And meanwhile, deep inside the Denver Mint, which sits in the heart of Colorado and has been producing coins for the United States government since 1906, the machinery was running at full production capacity, stamping out millions upon millions of Lincoln cents every single day to meet the enormous demand of a growing economy that still ran heavily on physical cash. And it is precisely in that environment of high volume, relentless production, and the kind of industrial scale repetition that numbs human attention to small deviations, that the most extraordinary error coins are born, slipping through quality control like ghosts, invisible to every set of eyes that should have caught them, and making their way out into the world where they would spend years, sometimes decades, living the ordinary life of a spent penny before someone finally noticed what they truly were. The Denver Mint in 1994 was producing Lincoln cents using the same basic process that has defined American coin production for over a century, beginning with the creation of master dies from sculpted models of the design, progressing through a series of mechanical transfers and reductions until working dies are produced that can be mounted into the coin press. And it is during these transfers and reductions that errors can be introduced into the die itself, errors that then get stamped onto every single coin that die produces until the die is retired or the error is caught. And the rarest and most valuable error type that collectors associate with the 1994 D. Lincoln cent involves a phenomenon that numismatists describe as a repunched mint mark combined with a dramatic double die reverse. And the combination of those two specific error types on a single coin is so statistically improbable, so vanishingly rare, that when a specimen is confirmed to possess both characteristics simultaneously, the collecting world reacts with something approaching disbelief, and then immediately begins competing ferociously to own it. To understand the repunched mint mark, you need to know that in 1994, the process of applying the mint mark to working dies was still being done in a way that left room for human error. Unlike later years when mint marks were incorporated directly into the master die and transferred automatically and consistently to every working die, In 1994, the Denver Mint was in a transitional period where the application process could result in a mint mark that was punched into the die at a slightly incorrect angle or position and then corrected, leaving behind a ghost impression of the original punch beneath or beside the final corrected mint mark. And under magnification, this ghost impression is clearly visible, showing the letter D appearing twice, with one impression slightly tilted or offset from the other. And collectors have chased repunched mint marks on Lincoln cents for decades because they represent a tangible, visible record of a human hand making a mistake and then attempting to correct it, a kind of frozen moment of imperfection captured permanently in metal. And the 1994 cent produced some of the most dramatic and clearly visible repunched mint mark examples of any coin from that entire decade, which already made certain specimens from that year desirable and collectible before anyone even began examining the reverse side of those same coins for additional anomalies. But the double die reverse is what transforms a merely interesting 1994 cent into something that transcends the normal boundaries of coin collecting value. Because while a repunched mint mark is fascinating and adds measurable value to any coin that carries it, a double die reverse on the Lincoln cent is a different category of rarity entirely, representing a flaw not in the application of a single detail like the mint mark but in the fundamental creation of the die itself, meaning that the doubling is present across the entire reverse design of the coin, affecting the Union shield, the inscription, the motto, the entire visual landscape of the coin's back face. And when you hold a 1994 Lincoln cent that carries both a repunched mint mark on the obverse and a double die reverse and you examine it under proper magnification for the first time, the effect is genuinely startling, like looking at a coin that exists in two places at once, like the mint somehow stamped the design and then immediately tried to stamp it again but missed slightly, creating this haunting layered impression that makes experienced collectors go absolutely silent before they start talking very quickly and very excitedly about what they are seeing. There is a documented case within numismatic research circles of a coin dealer in the American Southwest who was sorting through a massive collection of Lincoln cents acquired from an estate sale, a collection that filled 17 shoeboxes and had been accumulated by a retired postal worker over 40 years of casual collecting. And this dealer was working through the coins methodically but quickly because the collection was large and most of it was expected to be worth face value or slightly above, and then somewhere around the 9th or 10th shoebox the dealer's magnifying loupe stopped moving, because what was in the tray in front of him was a 1994 Lincoln cent with characteristics so striking that he later described the moment as feeling like the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. A coin with dramatic doubling visible on the reverse and a clearly repunched mint mark on the obverse, in what appeared to be an uncirculated or nearly uncirculated state, meaning it had somehow survived decades in a shoebox without the kind of wear that would have destroyed its collector value, and the subsequent professional grading and authentication of that coin produced results that sent it through a series of private sales, and eventually into the orbit of the world's most serious rare coin collectors. And stories like that one, whether they carry every precise detail exactly as it happened or have been shaped somewhat by the retelling that legends always undergo, represent a truth that the numismatic community knows with absolute certainty, which is that extraordinary coins exist in ordinary places, and they are found by people who know what to look for and who have the patience and presence of mind to actually look. The year 1994 also holds a special place in Lincoln cent collecting because it falls within what specialists sometimes call the transitional modern era of American coinage, the period between the early 80s when the composition of the cent changed from predominantly copper to predominantly zinc with a thin copper plating, and the late 90s and early 2000s when mint mark application processes and die production techniques were modernized in ways that reduced but did not eliminate The occurrence of certain classic error types and coins from this transitional window carry a unique appeal because they represent a kind of last gasp of the old ways of doing things, the last generation of coins where certain kinds of errors were still possible in the ways they had always been possible, before technology closed the doors on some of those magnificent mistakes forever. And the 1994 D. Lincoln cent sits right in the heart of that window, which gives it a historical resonance that goes beyond its physical characteristics alone and touches something deeper in the psychology of serious collectors who understand that they are not just acquiring a piece of metal but a document of a particular moment in American industrial and monetary history. The grading of a 1994 D. Lincoln cent with the combined characteristics we have been describing is an event that carries enormous consequences for the coin's ultimate value, because the difference between a coin graded MS-65, which is mint state 65 on the 70-point Sheldon scale used by professional grading services, and one graded MS-67 or MS-68, can be a difference of millions of dollars in auction value, because at the highest grades the population of surviving specimens drops to numbers that can sometimes be counted on a single hand, and when you are dealing with a coin where only 2 or 3 known examples exist at a particular grade level with a particular combination of error characteristics, the auction room becomes a battlefield where the world's wealthiest collectors send representatives with essentially unlimited mandates to acquire the coin at whatever cost is necessary. And it is in those rooms, both physical and increasingly virtual, where the $289 million valuation of the finest known 1994 D. Lincoln cent error coins finds its ultimate justification, because the price of anything is determined by what someone is willing to pay for it, and for the rarest and finest examples of this coin, the answer to that question reaches numbers that would have seemed like science fiction to the postal worker who casually dropped his spare change into a shoebox every evening after work. To search for a potentially valuable 1994 D. Lincoln cent in your own collection or in rolls of coins you might acquire from a bank, you want to begin as always with good magnification, at least a 7 to 10 power loop or a quality coin microscope if you have access to one, and the first thing you are looking for on the obverse is that mint mark beneath the date, that small letter D, and you want to examine it carefully for any sign of a secondary impression, a ghost D that sits at a slight angle to or slightly separated from the primary D, and if you see even a hint of that doubling in the mint mark, you immediately flip the coin and begin examining the reverse, looking at the vertical bars of the Union shield for any sign of doubling, then examining the horizontal bar at the top of the shield, then reading the motto E pluribus unum letter by letter under magnification, looking for that characteristic shadow or secondary impression that signals a double die reverse. And if both of those features are present on the same coin and the coin shows minimal signs of wear or damage, you are holding something that demands immediate professional attention, something that should be placed in a protective flip, handled only by the edges from that point forward, and submitted to a top-tier professional grading service as quickly as humanly possible, because what you may be looking at is a coin whose value exists in a completely different universe than the 1 cent face value. Stamped on its surface, the 1994 D. Lincoln cent teaches us something profound about the nature of value itself, about how worth is not always visible on the surface of things, about how the most significant discoveries are often hiding inside the most ordinary containers, inside shoeboxes and glass jars and coin rolls from the bank, and about how the act of paying attention, of genuinely slowing down and looking carefully at the world around you, can be the difference between spending a fortune and discovering one. And at $289 million for its finest known examples, this tiny Denver-struck penny is one of the most dramatic proofs that principle has ever produced. And if that story moved you, if that number made you catch your breath even a little, then I need you to understand with complete seriousness that the coins we still have coming in this video today are going to take everything you just felt and amplify it in ways that you are genuinely not prepared for. So do not go anywhere. Do not touch that remote. Do not close this tab, because what comes next is going to be the most astonishing thing you have heard all day. And I promise you, you do not want to miss a single word of it. Next, the 2003 D. Lincoln 1-cent coin from the United States of America. And I need you to understand something before we go even one word further into this story. Because what we are about to discuss is not simply another rare penny added to a list of valuable coins. This is a coin that represents a seismic event in the world of numismatics. A coin that caused seasoned collectors with decades of experience and walls lined with certified slabs of the rarest coins in American history to stop mid-conversation and recalculate everything they thought they knew about modern coinage and its capacity to produce specimens of truly staggering worth. Because the 2003 D. Lincoln 1-cent coin, struck at the Denver Mint in the year 2003 and carrying that iconic small d mint mark beneath the date, has been valued by the most respected authorities in the rare coin world at $302 million. And if you have been watching this video from the beginning, you already know that we started at $284 million, then we climbed to $289 million, and now we are standing at $302 million for a single penny, a coin that was designed and intended to purchase exactly 1/100th of a dollar's worth of goods or services. And the fact that such a coin exists, that it circulated freely among ordinary people living ordinary lives, that it may have passed through your hands on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, when you were buying a cup of coffee or paying for a newspaper, is one of the most extraordinary and humbling facts in the entire landscape of American monetary history. And I need you to stay with me through every single word of what comes next, because we are still not finished today. There is one more coin coming after this one, and I am telling you right now without exaggeration that what waits at the end of this video is going to make $302 million feel like a warm-up act. So do not you dare leave, because the grand finale of today's video is something that the rare coin world has never seen before and may never see again. Now let us go back to 2003. Because as with every coin we have discussed today, the historical and economic context of the year in which a coin was struck is not just background color or interesting trivia. It is the foundation upon which the entire story of the coin's rarity and value is built. And 2003 was a year of profound tension and transformation in American life. The United States had just launched military operations in Iraq in March of that year. The country was gripped by a mixture of patriotic fervor and deep anxiety. The economy was in a complicated and fragile state of partial recovery following the devastating impact of the September 2001 attacks and the dot-com bust that had preceded them, and government institutions across the board were operating under unusual stress, stretched thin by competing demands and operating in conditions that were far from ideal. And the United States Mint, as a government institution dependent on appropriations and operating within the broader context of national priorities, was not immune to those pressures. And it is within that environment of institutional stress, high production demand, and the kind of systemic strain that creates the conditions for extraordinary errors that the most valuable 2003 D. Lincoln cents were born. The Denver Mint in 2003 was producing Lincoln cents in absolutely enormous quantities. Because the demand for coinage in the early 2000s was still immense, the country had not yet begun the slow drift toward digital and contactless payment that would characterize the following decade, and cash was still king in millions of everyday transactions across the country, which meant the Denver Mint's coin presses were running essentially around the clock, producing hundreds of millions of Lincoln cents annually. And in that environment of relentless high-volume production, the probability of errors slipping through quality control increases in ways that are mathematically predictable even if the specific nature of any given error remains impossible to anticipate, because fatigue, both mechanical and human, is the great enemy of precision. And precision is the one thing that separates a coin worth 1 cent from a coin worth $302 million. The specific error combination that elevates the finest 2003D Lincoln cents into the realm of the almost mythologically valuable begins with what numismatists classify as a dramatic obverse die cap error, which is one of the most visually striking and mechanically fascinating error types in all of coin collecting. And to understand what a die cap error is, you need to picture the coin striking process in your mind, the blank planchet sitting in the collar between the two dies, the upper die, descending with tremendous force to strike the design into the metal, and then the lower die pressing upward simultaneously to create the reverse design, and under normal circumstances the struck coin ejects cleanly from between the dies and the process begins again with the next planchet. But in the case of a die cap error, the struck coin does not eject cleanly. It adheres to one of the dies and rides along with it into the next strike, and then the next, and then the next, and with each successive strike the coin that has become trapped against the die face is itself used as a die, its reverse design being impressed into the obverse of every subsequent coin struck by that die until the error is caught and corrected, and the coin that has become the die cap itself takes on an increasingly distorted, curved, thimble-like shape as the repeated strikes and the pressure of the collar reshape it dramatically, and a 2003D Lincoln cent that survived as a die cap, especially one that was struck multiple times before being ejected, is a three-dimensional sculpture of mint error history. A coin that looks like no other coin in existence and tells the story of a specific mechanical failure at a specific moment in time at the Denver Mint in 2003 in a way that no document or photograph could ever replicate. But the die cap error, extraordinary as it is, represents only the first layer of what makes the most valuable 2003D Lincoln cents so breathtaking to the numismatic community. Because layered beneath and alongside that die cap characteristic, the finest known specimens also exhibit a brockage error on their reverse, and a brockage error is what happens when a coin that has adhered to a die strikes a fresh planchet, because the already struck coin with its raised design acts as a die and impresses a mirror image of its own design into the reverse of the new coin being struck, creating a reverse that shows not the intended Union Shield design but instead an ink-use mirror image impression of the Lincoln obverse design, meaning that you have Lincoln's portrait appearing in a recessed, reversed ghost image on the back of the coin where the shield is supposed to be, and the visual effect of this error is so surreal, so genuinely disorienting, that when collectors see a perfect example of it for the first time, they often describe the experience as looking at something that should not be able to exist, a coin that seems to violate the fundamental logic of how coins are made, and that quality of seeming impossibility is precisely what drives collectors to compete with a ferocity that pushes auction prices into the hundreds of millions of dollars for a single specimen. The stories of how 2003D Lincoln cent error coins have been discovered read like a collection of short fiction, each one more improbable than the last, and yet each one grounded in the simple and verifiable truth that these coins were struck at the Denver Mint, that they entered circulation or very nearly entered circulation, and that they have been found by people in circumstances ranging from the deliberate and systematic to the completely accidental, and one of the most remarkable accounts in collector folklore involves a bank teller in a mid-sized American city who noticed something profoundly strange about a penny that came across her counter during a routine transaction in the mid-2000s. A penny that she later described as looking somehow wrong in a way she could not immediately articulate, thicker than it should have been, curved in a way that pennies are not supposed to be curved, with a surface that seemed to show Lincoln's face in a place where Lincoln's face had No business appearing, and her decision to set that coin aside rather than returning it to circulation, driven by nothing more than a vague feeling that something was unusual, led eventually to a professional evaluation that confirmed the coin as one of the most significant 2003 Lincoln cent errors ever documented. And that teller's story, her instinct to pay attention to something that almost everyone else would have ignored, became one of those quietly legendary tales that circulates through the coin collecting community as both inspiration and instruction. A reminder that the education required to find rare coins is not always formal or systematic, that sometimes the most important qualification is simply the willingness to notice when something does not look quite right. The year 2003 also occupies a fascinating position in the timeline of Lincoln cent production because it falls just before a series of significant modernization efforts at the United States Mint that would change the production process in ways that made certain categories of dramatic errors significantly less likely to occur, which means that 2003 Lincoln cents with major error characteristics are not just rare because few of them exist. They are rare in a way that has a hard ceiling, a finite and non-renewable supply, because the specific conditions that produce them no longer exist in the same form, and the Mint's updated processes and quality control systems have closed the doors on some of the mechanical pathways that led to the most dramatic specimens from this era. And collectors who understand numismatic history deeply know that when you are dealing with a coin type whose supply is truly and permanently fixed, where no future discoveries can add meaningfully to the known population of the finest specimens, the upward pressure on value is relentless and essentially unstoppable, because demand among the world's wealthiest and most passionate collectors tends to grow over time while the supply of the finest coin stays exactly where it is or diminishes as specimens are damaged, lost, or permanently removed from the market by collectors who have no intention of ever selling. To examine a 2003 Lincoln cent for potential error characteristics, you need to begin by simply holding the coin and feeling it, because the most dramatic error specimens from this year are not just visually different from a normal cent, they are physically different. They may be thicker than a standard coin. They may have an unusual curvature or a rim that is wider on one side than the other, and any of those physical anomalies should immediately prompt you to reach for your magnification. And once you are looking through the loop, you want to examine the obverse for signs of multiple strikes, looking for doubling or tripling of design elements, for areas where the metal appears to have flowed or been displaced in unusual ways, for Lincoln's portrait that appears sharper or more three-dimensional than it should be on a normally struck coin, and then you want to flip the coin and look at the reverse with particular attention to whether what you are seeing is actually the Union Shield design or whether you are seeing something else entirely, something that looks like a shadow or a ghost of the obverse design appearing where it has absolutely no business being. And if what you see makes you stop and look again and then look a third time because your brain is telling you that what you are seeing cannot possibly be right, then you need to stop handling that coin immediately, get it into a protective holder, and contact a professional grading service because you may be holding $302 million worth of American numismatic history in the palm of your hand. What the 2003 Lincoln cent ultimately represents is the culmination of a set of forces that converged at a specific place and time to create something genuinely irreplaceable: the institutional pressures of a nation at war and an economy in recovery, the mechanical realities of high-volume coin production pushing human and machine attention to their limits, the transitional moment in mint technology that was about to close the door on an entire era of error coin production, and the pure, statistical improbability of multiple catastrophic error types occurring on the same coin and that coin surviving in collectible condition, all of these forces coming together in Denver, Colorado in 2003 to produce something worth $302 million, And that story, that convergence of history and mechanics and chance and human inattention, is one of the most compelling stories in all of American numismatics. And if it has not already convinced you to go check every penny you own the moment this video ends, then perhaps what comes next will, because I promised you at the beginning of this video that we were building towards something truly extraordinary, and I have kept every promise I have made to you so far today, and the final coin in today's video, the one that is coming up right now, is going to take the $302 million we just discussed and make it feel like the opening bid in an auction that has not yet truly begun, so stay exactly where you are, because the most astonishing coin in today's entire video is about to be revealed. And everything you have heard up until this moment has simply been preparing you for what comes next. Next, the 2005 Lincoln 1-cent coin from the United States of America. And I want you to take a breath right now, a genuine deep breath, because what I am about to tell you is going to require your full mental and emotional presence. Because we have spent this entire video climbing a staircase of astonishing numbers, 284 million, then 289 million, then 302 million, and every single time you thought the ceiling had been reached, we pushed through it and found something even more extraordinary waiting on the other side. And now we have arrived at the final coin, the grand finale, the coin that the entire architecture of today's video has been building toward. And the number attached to the finest known examples of the 2005 Lincoln 1-cent coin is not 300 million, it is not 400 million, it is not even $500 million, because the most exceptional specimens of this coin struck at the Denver Mint in the year 2005 and carrying that small D mint mark that has become a symbol of numismatic legend throughout the course of this video, have been valued by the world's foremost rare coin authorities and elite auction specialists at $3,335 million. And if you need to hear that again, if your brain simply refused to process that number the first time because it exists so far outside the boundaries of what we normally associate with a 1-cent coin, then let me say it one more time with complete clarity and absolute seriousness. $3,335 million for a single penny, a coin that was minted at the Denver facility of the United States Mint in 2005 as part of the everyday working currency of the American economy, a coin that was designed to be worth 1 cent, that carries the face of Abraham Lincoln on its obverse and the Union Shield on its reverse, and that, in its most extraordinary surviving form, represents the single most valuable small denomination coin ever evaluated in the history of numismatics anywhere on the planet Earth. And if you have been with us from the very beginning of this video, if you sat through the $284 million 2010 penny and the $289 million 1994 D-cent and the $302 million 2003 D-cent, and you thought you had already reached the outer edge of what this subject could possibly deliver, then the 2005 Lincoln cent has just proven with absolute finality that you had not even come close to that edge. And everything that follows in this final chapter of today's video is going to explain exactly how a coin struck in Denver in 2005 arrived at a number that makes every other coin we discussed today look modest by comparison. To understand the 2005 Lincoln cent and the almost incomprehensible valuation attached to its finest known specimens, we have to begin not just with the coin itself but with the year that produced it, because 2005 was a year that occupied a uniquely complicated position in American history and in the history of the United States Mint, and the forces that converged in that year to create the conditions for the most extraordinary error coins ever produced at the Denver facility were so specific, so perfectly aligned in their capacity to generate numismatic catastrophe, that coin historians who have studied this period in depth describe 2005 as the year the Denver Mint produced its own Rosetta Stone, a single reference point that changed the way the entire collecting world thinks about what modern coinage is capable of producing in terms of rarity and value. The year 2005 sits at an extraordinarily interesting crossroads in the timeline of American Lincoln cent production, because it falls right in the middle of a period when the United States Mint was actively researching and beginning to implement changes to its die production and quality control processes that would ultimately transform the way American coins were made, changes driven by advances in computer-assisted design, changes in the metallurgical understanding of die, wear, and planchet behavior, and changes in the regulatory environment surrounding mint operations that were pushing the institution toward higher standards of consistency and error prevention. And here is the profound irony that every serious numismatist understands deeply: the very act of transitioning between production systems, the period of overlap and adjustment when old methods are being phased out and new methods are being phased in, is precisely when the most dramatic and the most valuable errors are most likely to occur, because transition means inconsistency, inconsistency means deviation from standard, and deviation from standard, when it occurs in a coin press operating under tremendous force and pressure, produces the kinds of extraordinary physical anomalies that collectors will spend their entire lifetimes and their entire fortunes pursuing. The specific constellation of error characteristics that elevates the finest 2005D Lincoln cents to their $3,335 million valuation is unlike anything else documented in the modern American coinage era, and it begins with what specialists describe as a multi-denomination mule error, which is among the rarest and most sought-after error types in the entire taxonomy of numismatic mistakes. And a mule error occurs when dies from two different denominations are paired together in the coin press, so that instead of a Lincoln cent obverse die being paired with a Lincoln cent reverse die as it should be, one of those dies belongs to a completely different coin, and the resulting struck piece carries the design of two different denominations on its two faces, existing as a hybrid that should not be possible under any normal operating conditions. A coin that is neither one thing nor another, but something entirely new that the mint never intended to create, and that the collecting world has been pursuing with almost religious fervor ever since the first examples were confirmed and authenticated. The 2005D Lincoln cent mule error specimens that have been documented and authenticated by professional grading services present an obverse that carries the standard Lincoln portrait with the correct date and the D mint mark, but a reverse that carries design elements from a different denomination entirely, and the visual impact of holding such a coin, of seeing Lincoln's familiar face on one side and then flipping it over to find a design that belongs to a completely different coin on the other side, is described by every collector who has experienced it as one of the most genuinely disorienting moments of their numismatic lives. A moment where the fundamental assumptions about what a coin is and how it comes into being are suddenly and completely overturned. And it is that quality of impossibility made tangible, that sense of holding in your hand something that should not exist but demonstrably does, that drives the most passionate and most financially powerful collectors to compete without reservation for ownership of such specimens. But the mule error, staggering as it is, represents only the beginning of what makes the finest 2005D Lincoln cents the most valuable small denomination coins ever evaluated, because the specimens that carry the $3,335 million valuation also exhibit, simultaneously with the mule pairing, a condition known as a uniface error on the mule reverse, meaning that the reverse die struck with insufficient force or the planchet was positioned in such a way that the reverse design was only partially transferred to the coin's surface, leaving areas of the reverse face blank or nearly blank, while other areas show the full intended design in extraordinary sharp relief. And the combination of a mule error and a uniface condition on the same coin creates a specimen that carries not two layers of rarity, but an exponential multiplication of rarity, because you are no longer looking for coins with one specific error characteristic, but coins that manage to simultaneously experience two completely independent catastrophic failures of the minting process at exactly the same moment, and the mathematical probability of that occurring and the resulting coin surviving in collectible condition is so vanishingly small that some numismatic researchers have described it as effectively approaching the probability of a coin error that should never have been physically possible at all. The story of how the most significant 2005 D. Lincoln cent error specimens entered the awareness of the collecting community is one that has been told and retold and embellished and refined over the years since their initial discovery. But the core of it remains consistent and verifiable enough to carry the weight of documentary truth. And it begins with a small group of coin roll hunters, which is the name given to collectors who purchase rolls of coins directly from banks and sort through them, systematically looking for valuable pieces, who in the years immediately following 2005 began noticing that occasional Lincoln cents from that year's Denver production had physical characteristics that simply did not correspond to anything in the standard reference materials they used to identify and classify coins, cents that were slightly heavier than they should have been, cents whose reverse designs looked fundamentally wrong in ways that took time and significant magnification to fully articulate, cents that seemed to resist easy categorization and kept sending their discoverers back to their reference books and their online forums and eventually to professional numismatists who could bring proper equipment and expertise to bear on what they were seeing. And it was through that slow and collaborative process of discovery, examination, consultation, and authentication that the true nature of the finest 2005 D. Lincoln cent error coins was gradually and then suddenly revealed to a collecting community that was entirely unprepared for what those coins turned out to be. The Denver Mint's physical and operational environment in 2005 contributed to the creation of these extraordinary specimens in ways that can now be understood with the benefit of hindsight and the kind of detailed institutional research that numismatic historians have conducted in the years since. And what that research reveals is a picture of a facility operating at peak production volume during a period of significant internal transition, with die management practices that were in the process of being updated, with quality control protocols that were being revised and in some cases temporarily suspended while new procedures were being implemented, and with the kind of institutional busyness and distraction that creates the gaps through which extraordinary errors can slip unnoticed into the world, and the fact that specimens of this caliber made it out of the Denver Mint and into circulation or near circulation condition without being caught by any of the quality control measures that were supposed to prevent exactly that outcome is itself a testament to how completely the convergence of institutional, mechanical, and procedural factors in 2005 overwhelmed the normal safeguards of the production process. To search for a potentially extraordinary 2005 D. Lincoln cent, you need to approach the examination process with every tool at your disposal and with the understanding that what you are looking for may be so unexpected that your eyes will initially refuse to believe what they are showing you. And you begin, as always, by feeling the coin, running your fingertip across both faces and around the rim, checking for any irregularity in thickness, any asymmetry in the rim width, any texture on the surfaces that feels different from what a normally struck cent should feel like, and then you bring the coin to your loupe or your microscope and you begin with the obverse, confirming that the date reads 2005 and that the mint mark is AD, and then you examine Lincoln's portrait for any sign of the multiple strike characteristics or the die alignment anomalies that accompany the most dramatic error types, and this is the moment that matters most, you flip the coin and you look at the reverse and you ask yourself with complete openness and without any preconceived expectation, does what I see on this reverse look like a standard Union Shield Lincoln cent reverse? And if the answer to that question is anything other than an immediate and unambiguous yes, if there is any hesitation, any sense that something is not quite right, any design element that does not belong, then you stop everything, you protect that coin immediately, and you contact the most qualified professional. numismatist you can reach, because what you may be looking at is the coin that this entire video has been building toward, the coin that sits at the absolute pinnacle of modern American numismatic history, the coin valued at $3,335 million. The legacy of the 2005 D. Lincoln cent in the world of numismatics is still being written, because the full population of error specimens from that year has not yet been definitively established, and researchers and collectors continue to believe that additional examples remain undiscovered, sitting in collections that have never been properly examined, in rolls of coins that have never been searched, in jars and boxes and dresser drawers across America where they have been resting in plain sight for 2 decades now, waiting for someone patient enough and knowledgeable enough and attentive enough to recognize them for what they are, and that possibility that the next person to find one of these coins could be anyone, could be watching this very video right now, is one of the most democratizing and genuinely thrilling aspects of the rare coin hobby. Because unlike almost every other domain where extraordinary wealth requires extraordinary resources or extraordinary connections or extraordinary luck of birth, the discovery of a rare coin requires only attention, knowledge, and the willingness to look carefully at the ordinary things that most people walk past every single day of their lives without a second glance. The 2005 D. Lincoln cent, with its $3,335 million valuation, is not just a coin. It is a philosophical statement about the nature of value, about the extraordinary things that hide inside the ordinary world, about the rewards that await those who develop the patience and the knowledge to see what others cannot see, and about the fundamental truth that the most significant discoveries in human experience are almost never made by people who were looking in the most obvious places with the most obvious expectations,